Well, hey guys, welcome to the Reach Right podcast, episode number 21. I am your host, Thomas Costello, and with me as always is my co-host,
Ian Hyatt. Hey, Thomas, how's it going, man?
Going good. Ian, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
Good.
Another sunny day in November in Austin, Texas. So,
Yeah. Awesome. Glad to hear it. It's actually November, but I think this isn't going live until right after probably December.
Yeah.
So here we are in recording
It'll
in November.
It'll probably still be sunny and warm then for us, too. So,
Yeah, you're probably right. Know that it certainly is sunny and warm here in Honolulu, but we'll dive into our topic here today. We got a good one, I think. We'll be talking today about 6 social media risks every church needs to manage. 6 social media risks every church needs to manage. And really we want to get into why social media is valuable to churches, but it should never replace your church website. And that's something that we hear from churches, right? I mean, you hear that from pastors thinking that maybe that's a strategy that could work. Tell me what you hear.
Yeah, we used to hear this, I think, a few years back when churches started jumping on the social media bandwagon, and not just that, taking advantage of it would probably be a better way to put it. But at that time, everyone thought, because everyone's, I guess it's a cultural thing that everyone likes to jump from one thing to the next. There was a point in time where pastors thought, oh, well, we're on Facebook now. We don't need a website. And we had to, no, we'd pump the brakes. They both have different uses and advantages to each, and they both should tie together and all of that. So I don't hear that as much now, but I do still hear from time to time, not as much, but that, oh yeah, we're on Facebook, so we don't use our website that much. And, and it's almost kind of something that some pastors and ministry leaders assume if they're on Facebook or using social media that they're good. That's all they need online. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I think there's some heightened awareness around this topic right now. And this is probably why we're talking about it. And as we're recording this, some of the social media and tech industry CEOs are sitting in front of Congress right now, and they're being interviewed and talking about some of those challenges. So we never want to get too political in these conversations, but there are obvious political conversations that are happening around this, and that bleeds over into how it affects churches, because I think some of those political concerns have to do with freedom of communication, freedom of religion, some of those kinds of things. So we'll get into that a little bit in this conversation here today. But I have seen a lot of churches, if they haven't outright rejected having a website for social media, I have heard a lot of them put a lot more of their focus in that. And to some degree, it works. Like there's a lot of like social media influencer pastors out there nowadays, right? So I have friends that are Instagram famous and lead churches, and they really do a good job using that. But even they would tell you, those that do really well on Instagram, is that you need to have your own platform. You need to have your own place, your own website, where that's still the launching off point. I remember this, one of the mistakes that a lot of churches used to make, and we probably helped them make that as we were designing websites a few years back, is that they would put a lot of focus on their church website to pushing people off to connecting with them on social media channels. Yeah. And we found that that's actually counterproductive. Am I right?
Yep, you're exactly right.
And
for
why
several reasons.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is Google is still looking when people are doing searches for, churches or anything church related. Google, and this would be the case for a business too. If someone's looking for anything out there, restaurant or whatever, Google still is giving priority and preference to directing someone's search to a website instead of social media. So a website still gets precedence. Google's looking for that first. Yeah. And also, when you send people out of your website to social media, the way Google and the search engines will view that is that, okay, this website's not really an authority for content, or it's being viewed as less important, and this website or this church website they're sending people off of it, so therefore it actually demotes you in the search engine ranking. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. And there's a variety, and I think a lot of them actually come up in our list of 6 risks that come with social media here. So we can kind of just dive into the list here. We'll kind of tackle one of them or a couple of them at a time here, and we'll go through. But why don't you hit number 1 for us?
Yeah, I think number one's a great one. It's content ownership is one of the risks too, because first of all, if all of your content on Facebook, well, Facebook basically owns that. and as we're seeing right now, there's been some shifts and political things happening to where, a lot of churches are becoming concerned with, if they put all their eggs in the Facebook or even Twitter basket or Instagram basket, Facebook could just decide, hey, we don't like what this church is communicating, and therefore that they can not only stop it, it just belongs to them. And I think that for sermon content, we've seen, of course, since the pandemic, that obviously it's a good thing, by the way, if you're using Facebook Live, continue to do that and putting your sermons there. But again, it's on their website, not yours. Right. So it belongs to them, and that's valuable content that you want to keep your messages, and you want to be able to get those out to people and have control over that. So that's those are a couple of reasons why it's content ownership's a big deal.
Yeah, I see this mistake a lot with church sermons. So there's such a simple platform to do live broadcasting, to upload sermons, and there's unlimited storage, and it seems like a nice, easy, free way to do it. And it is. Yeah. All those things are true. And I think every church should upload their content onto those channels. So, for instance, a lot of our audience is watching this on Facebook right now, and they're watching us on social media channels. So we're not in any way against that, but I think the mistake that churches make a lot of times is they put it exclusively on those platforms, and then they don't have access to it anymore. And here's the problem is that with Facebook, it doesn't have the same longevity. It's not as, in the industry, we'd call it evergreen, as if it's on your own website. So with a sermon you put onto Facebook, well, in the first day, it might reach maybe 10% of your likes on Facebook, 10% of your audience. So if you have 1,000 people that follow your church on Facebook, maybe 100 of them might see the sermon on the Facebook Live organically. But the problem is on Monday, when that sermon's a day old, well, you might only see 2 or 3 people reaching it. And by a week, it's not being pushed anywhere anymore at all, unless people are actually getting on there and actively sharing the message. Now, contrast that with what's happening on your website is you have something that is on your own property. It's something that you have full control over. And the nice thing is you can go onto social channels and share it from there into the future. So it really serves as something that's much more evergreen. And like that's a term that's like it stays green all the time. It's always useful, always valuable. And so I think that's a really important reason that churches should make a point of putting things onto social media, but absolutely make sure you have full control over really every sermon you've done. I think that's one of the most valuable resources that churches have too, is they have these huge libraries of content that pastors have recorded over the years that is able to be there and is still just as valuable today as it was 5 years ago. The book of Mark hasn't changed. And if you preached a series on Mark, chances are that content is just as valuable today as it was when it was recorded. So keeping that front and center, it is evergreen. So keeping it front and center on your website is really important.
And not just sermon content. That's obviously very valuable. And that's on the top of everyone's mind, of course, during this whole pandemic year in 2020, because everyone's getting a lot of their sermons online. But I think also I've been personally hearing from a lot of pastors now that this content ownership thing is a big deal. And a lot of it has to do with what we've seen in the news with the social media giants going before Congress and such. But and churches are realizing, hey, I want my own hub. This belongs to our church. We can control, our content there, and it belongs to us. So I think, a lot of pastors and ministry leaders they're really wising up to that right now. So
let me say this too, is that I think I think you're right to say it's not just the sermon side of things. I think it's also it's tied to the text content that you put onto social media too. So I've seen a lot of pastors and church leaders do really well with what you'd call like a long form post on social. And I don't know, I'm sure you've read those before. Usually it's tied to some kind of major issue or something that's trending in our society. But I think there's a lot of value, instead of writing out those long 2, 3, 5, 600 word posts on social media, which can be valuable and get a lot of reach. I think putting it onto your own blog just gives it that evergreen value, and it's something that can be shared. It has a better chance of just being something that has more of a lifespan, and I think it's valuable to churches that way. So
that's it.
That's a couple of reasons why I think content ownership is something that it's a risk that churches need to really take a look at when they put things on social media. Second thing is censorship concerns. That's another risk that we have to talk about. This is something that's becoming more and more apparent, and I think it's obvious that these kinds of things happen. We are neither conservative nor liberal here at Reach Right. We're not a partisan organization, but the truth is that you can take a look and see that there is censorship that is taking place on social platforms right now. And it's something that churches need to be aware of. And I think the thing we miss is that censorship has changed its meaning. So it used to be, when I was a kid, the way you think of censorship is when someone says a bad word on TV, it gets cut off and you can't hear it, right? So they censor language that you're not supposed to say. The FCC did those kinds of things. I think what censorship looks like now is not that they don't allow you to say it, but there's like this invisible hand that reduces the number of people that hear the things you have to say based on the content of what you're actually saying. So we've seen this, so for instance, and we're not political. I don't know if I told you this yet or not, but some of our podcasts that we put out there, we did one that was called 6 Ways to Build Unity in a Contentious Post-Election World, right? So it was about, it mentioned election in it, right? It wasn't political at all, that podcast or the conversation, but it was about how to build unity, right? But because our title had the word election in it, we weren't able to promote it at all. They wouldn't let us put it out there. And then it really reduced our reach on that particular post. I wish we had named it differently had I understood that. But a lot of this is kind of trial and error, and you figure this stuff out as you go. So that's just one example of things. But yeah, I think this is something that churches should really be concerned about. What do you think?
Yeah, and also just based upon what we believe as far as the church and as Christians, that if for some reason Facebook and the leadership of Facebook has a problem with what you believe, and you just simply voicing that, well, that's they can control that and censor that, and that's not political. That's just if you're basically voicing your beliefs and they disagree with it based upon whatever cultural issues or whatever's going on. So I think that's a good point too for churches, for sure.
Yeah, I think the primary way that churches are going to experience this as of today is when it comes to issues of biblical definitions of marriage and biblical ideas on gender and some of those kinds of things. And Twitter specifically, and some on Facebook and other channels are actually doing censorship actively for people that take biblical views or traditional biblical views of marriage, traditional biblical views, especially on gender identity issues. So there is some limitation that's happening there right now. So all that to say is, if your primary method of communication is in someone else's control, it's on these social platforms, it's not on your own domain, on your own website, there is a danger that your message will be more and more diminished. And that's why it's so important that churches take full advantage of the channels that they have at their disposal, and they're using their own platforms whenever they possibly can, in addition to the social media channels that they can use too.
That's it. Yeah. That's good. And that's a good segue to our next point. Well, it has somewhat to do with it at least. But number 3 would be, it diminishes your reach. So when you fully rely upon social media, and there's several reasons why, but basically they've changed a lot with their algorithms, right? You could speak to this a lot too. Just that you on Facebook now particularly, and I've seen this just through my own personal usage of Facebook, that when you're posting something specifically, it finds other like-minded people that post similarly. So for churches, we obviously want to reach people that don't believe the same way as us or think the same way as us. So that's the first thing that comes to mind as far as the diminishing your reach. We want to reach the lost. We want to reach people that need Jesus. So that's where it can get, I think, if you're only reaching pastors and believers, Well, and most churches are not just looking for transfer growth either, right? So they shouldn't
of course.
Yeah.
I think this one's not, when I think of diminishing reach, this is not something that's church specific. I think this is something that every organization is really struggling with. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of them started with a model where they just basically had a service. And I don't know if you even remember this, but there was a time when there were no ads on Facebook.
Oh, I do remember. Yeah,
like when it first started, they had
days.
This. I know, right? There was no advertising. It was not yet the term they would use is it's not yet monetized.
Yeah.
So they weren't what they were trying to do is build a really big audience. And this is the way a lot of businesses work now: is build a really large user base. You have a large network effect of lots of people interacting with one another, and then you figure out how to monetize it. So get users and then figure out how to make money with it.
Yep.
And so what Facebook has been doing is they have been just really trying to further and further monetize it to create value for their shareholders.
Yeah.
And what that's done is that for organizations, they have limited their reach unless you're willing to pay. And so social media has become, this is all the channels, has become more and more a pay-to-play kind of an environment, where if you want to reach people outside of the few that you reach organically, you're going to have to pay ad prices and boost posts and do those kinds of things to make that happen. So I can say that for our organization, we started Reach Right in the very end of 2015, coming up on our 5-year anniversary. And I know for us that our organic reach on social platforms is down about 80% from where it was when we started. So it really has a diminishing return. It's not that we're producing worse content. We're producing better content, I believe, and more than we ever have before. And there is a clear reduction in those kinds of things. So that's their model. And then on top of that, in 2018, Facebook came out and said, we are actively going to make some changes to our algorithm where we're going to put more emphasis on giving you content from friends and family, and less content from news organizations and businesses and churches. They fall into that category there. So there's this, the tide is rising against you, I guess you could say, when it comes to your returns, when it comes to social media on there. So anything else to add to that one?
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you're talking about how it's monetized now and the marketing aspect of Facebook. It reminded me of a conversation I had just this morning with a ministry leader, and he said something funny. He said, well, how come Tyler Perry, he gets, when he posts something, everyone sees it, and everyone, and of course, he is Tyler Perry and he's a celebrity. However, I just told the guy, and he wasn't as savvy with Facebook, and that's why we love to help and have these conversations as ministry leaders. But he said, I just simply said to him after that, I said, well, that's because he pays a lot of money to get his message out there and boosted, like you said, and so on. And he was like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And I was like, yes, if you're willing to pay Tyler Perry kind of money, hey, you can be very visible on Facebook.
Oh my goodness, yeah, you can be visible. Now, there is obviously value to having a very famous name, or to, as your user base and as you continue to make good content out there, Facebook will know to show it more, and Twitter will know to show it more to people. But it's not something that if you're starting from zero right now, don't be deceived into thinking that you can do it for free quickly. It'll take a long time to get there, and it'd be a lot of work organically really working on things that way. So that's the thought behind it. But
it's good.
All right, let me hit number 4. This is, you were kind of getting into this, I think, before, but I think we need to watch out for the risk of counterproductive echo-chambers. And this is one of those things. Echo-chambers is one of those words, and I'll kind of give a little explanation for those that are unfamiliar with it. What the Facebook algorithm and Twitter algorithms and Instagram algorithms, they are designed in a way that when you interact with content, it starts to think you like that content, and it will show you more of that kind of content. And what that does for them is it helps keep you on their platform. It keeps you using them. It keeps you interacting with people and helps their bottom line, because the longer you stay on Facebook, the more ads they can show you, and the more money they make.
Right.
So the byproduct of that, and what that winds up doing, is it winds up showing users content that they're most likely to engage with, which is usually produced by people that are like-minded with you. Yeah. And what happens is, if that's the pattern that you're in, that only continues to build on it. And Facebook and all these social media platforms, they really know us better than we realize that they know us. And what it does is it kind of puts you in these, what they call echo chambers, these things where you only hear like-minded voices. It's like you speak and it comes right back to you and sounds the same way. So we get into these echo chambers where all we're ever really talking to, the only people we're talking to, are people that are very like-minded. Yeah. And the challenge with this for churches specifically is that I think that goes against the Acts 1:8 call that we have, where we're supposed to go into Jerusalem and into Judea and to Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Because it's not just about reaching people that are physically distant from us. We can do that on social media, but I think there's value in reaching people that are that think differently from us. Yeah. And I think that's part of what our calling as a church is to reach people that aren't really like me. This is our modern day mission field, is maybe we have more in common with someone that's in the Philippines than we do with someone who's in our own neighborhood and voted differently from us. Right. So there's less common. So I think it's something that, just from a missions perspective, if we find ourselves always in these echo chambers, that is a real risk that our church will start to really hone in and become full of only people that are exactly like the leaders within our church and think just like us. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's like putting everyone in their own little cliques.
Absolutely.
So and we don't want that. I totally agree. It's anti what Scripture calls us to do. It's not biblical, and boy, aren't we in a time where we need unity of people of all diverse backgrounds, racially and thought processes, political views, all of that. That's one of the great things about living in America, is it's a melting pot, right? And we need to not be put into these little buckets.
And I think that's one of the things that I think is so hard for people right now, is that this feel that we're looking for unity. I think people are deceived into thinking that there's a lot of unity online because they look at their friends and you ask people on Facebook and they say, I don't really know anybody that thinks differently from me, or all the people that I like, they think the same way that I do. So who are all these people that are voting differently from me? I don't even know anybody like that. And so it's one of those things where there's so much disunity right now because we have this fake sense of unity on social media, but in the real world, we're just as divided as we've ever been. And I think this exists within the church the same way. So something we need to watch out for.
You might be saying to yourself, when you're in these counterproductive echo chambers, does anyone else, did they think like that? And the answer is yes, they do think differently than you. There's a lot of people that think very differently than you. And so that's good. Good. Well, we'll jump to number 5 here, and that's also that conversation control. And this is a big one. This is to be able to control the conversation and is a good thing. And what I mean by that is, obviously we want to be open, and communication's a two-way street, and we don't want to be controlling, but meaning that when it comes to your online communication, you want to be able to control the conversation. It's kind of funny. And this has a little bit to do with it, but the first thing that kind of popped in my mind is that, I kind of admire people that have the gall to post something political or like a hot controversial topic, because I'm like, man, they're going to be tied to that post all day long because what they don't have control over is what everyone is going to say and comment. And then when you get 50 different comments on it, you got to, learn how to respond to each one of those. So for me, I have a full-time job and a family. I don't have time for that. And I know it's not all of that, but that's one little funny example that pops to my mind. It's also just being able to, like we talked about, kind of like content ownership. You have control over kind of what you can say and ground the responses a little bit more if I'm on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think that it's if you're online for any amount of time as a church, you will have people say negative things about you. And that's okay. That's there, right? I'm not saying that that's the end all be all, and our main goal as churches is to not have people say anything mean about us. That's just that's not who we are. But it's going to happen. At the church I pastored last, I remember we had an issue within our church, and someone made a wild accusation that we basically encourage people to. We encouraged a lady who was sleeping around within our church, and they made up this long story about this and put it all over Yelp and Facebook and all over the internet. They put Google reviews that said all this. And you know what I could do about that? Nothing. Yeah, nothing. Right. We had to just sit there and take it. It's terrible. Totally untrue. We follow biblical views of sexuality and premarital sex. We have all those same, none of that's different about us. And we really had to sit there and let these accusations stand. We could respond and say, no, not the case. But, really we didn't have no control to delete these conversations. And, the fact is you never have control over that. There's going to be these social platforms. People are going to say bad things for you on Yelp. You look at any large church in your community. Maybe it's a mega church that's locally. You pull up any large church, you're going to find, if you pull up a Yelp review, you get onto Google reviews, you'll find people saying all kinds of things. Some of them are Christians, some